Hello everyone, I'm just going to set this up while we wait for people to join in. Great, so we are having people come in. Hi Ro, hi Dad. Yeah. So, so we'll begin in a minute. I think when we have a few more people. I hope you guys are having as good a weather as I'm having out here. It's really like nice, not even hot out right now. Oh, hello Marguerite. Nice of you to join in. I know we've been having a lot of conversations on the mythology groups and all. Good to see you here. Hi Tanvi. It's been long. We haven't spoken much, but nice to see you here too. So, hi Bhanu. Good to see you here. So, I think while we wait for a few more people, I thought I might as well just just give a little bit of a context about myself and what this session is generally about. I've been interested in mythology as far as I have remembered. I mean, I think anyone who knows me knows my relationship with mythology. So it's very interesting, on a regular basis. For me, mythology is no longer just an academical approach. It's something that on a daily basis, I keep reading stuff and I keep figuring out how to make it more relevant and all. I do also have my own contention with certain approaches of mythology, and I think I'm very interested in trying to explore, trying to redefine some of the ideas that I have, and also explore what other people are having, and that's something I'm very interested in. I know as Indians we have a very complicated relationship with mythology. It's not the same as what we would have with Greeks and Egyptians and all. But I do believe that when you read into that, when you are looking outside, you have a better understanding of what's inside. So I think that's been my interest thing, and that's what I think I like about mythology itself. Hi Ruchi, it's good to see you here. That's the thing. So for everyone who's tuned in, this is a Mythematical. It's a series that we are doing. This is the fifth one today, and what we do is we take a theme and look across different mythologies and what are the stories that were told, and then we do an analysis. So this has started with this thing, in collaboration with Cobalt Blue. Cobalt Blue is an organization which works in the space of mythology, storytelling, art, now wellness. Also, it's founded by Sandeep and Ruchi. Ruchi is right here. Hi Ruchi. And it's something that we always love exploring different topics around these things. Cobalt Blue's been doing a lot of interesting stuff around art itself. Check out their channel on Instagram. That's going to be really fun for everyone. So Mythematical, the term itself was something that I wanted to bring out. I wanted to give the feel of myths and themes, obviously, but I also wanted to give that feeling of something that needs to be studied, the patterns need to be seen. So like maths, which is basically a study of patterns and numbers and all, I wanted to bring that aspect of what would happen if you read enough myths, then you will see certain emerging patterns. Now, patterns does not by itself mean that everything is similar. It's a very reductive conclusion to draw if you assume that just because stories have similarities, there must be some commonalities directly. They do bring about certain elements that could have this thing. Maybe it's a cultural a cultural indication that most of the myths came from an earlier version of itself. But at the same time, I think the similarities, while they point out about the common humanity, it's the differences that bring out the different identities of every culture. And I think that's what's important to understand about different myths itself. One more thing I want to point out about myths itself before we begin the topic. There is this tendency of associating the word myth with fiction. There's a fallacy that we think that myth itself is fiction. Now, the word myth, if you look at from the historical term, which is coming from the Greek language itself, the word myth comes from the Greek word mythos. Now, which actually means speech, narrative, plot. So it's in the Greek language, the world could be divided, everything could be divided into logos and mythos. Logos being anything that is tangible, numeric, number, something that's empirically there, versus something mythos which had to be communicated in a speech, in narrative form. So it's only in the 19th century when the English were trying to translate it, they used the word mythology, which was a study of myths, and they attributed the word myth as something that was ascribed to what we are considering the classical myths, the Greek stories and all. And obviously, given the fact that they were coming from a very biblical narrative, which they kind of believed the biblical truths of the scriptures itself, for them the rest of any stories from a different culture was something that was fiction. And I think that is something that stayed over, and especially when in India we still have the colonial hangover of that term. So the word myth sometimes gets this sort of a bad repercussion of it being something fictional, something completely false. And you'll often hear, us Indians, we keep saying the word that, our stories like Ramayana, Mahabharata, they're not myths, these are itihas, or they are Sanatan Dharma. But to be honest, I mean, if you think about it, the word itself, myths, when it talks about the idea of it being a narrative that is foundational to a culture, if you take that as the definition, which is what I do in my talks and in just my understanding of the term, every culture has myths. And by the way, when I say myths don't always have to be something that is old. I mean, we have modern myths too. It's a complete different topic altogether. But think about it, all the things that we think about, the idea of being successful, the idea of falling in love, the idea of the American dream, I mean, all these are actually myths, and we are trying to live them on a daily basis. So it's important to look at myths as something that is crucial to a civilization, but by itself, the myths does not have to mean something that is not true. I mean, it is something that is true in the way a person believes it. So yeah, I think with that, I see we have a lot of people. Hello everyone. Great. So what I was right now just concluding was about the idea of mythology and myths, and this being mythematical. So yeah, I think we should just get started. I want to introduce the topic, as you guys must have read so far. The topic is, this is the fifth mythematical session, and the topic is about the separation of earth and sky. Mythological stories about the breakup that tore the horizon. So right off the topic itself, what you must be understanding is that there are multiple stories and many mythologies across different times and different civilizations altogether, where there's a common theme of the earth being in love with the sky. What's actually interesting is how often the gender is ascribed to each of them. What you'll see in the stories coming, going forward, is how in many stories it's quite often to make the earth into a female goddess, or the earth mother, and the sky into a god or a sky father. But at the same time, there are mythologies where this is reversed, and it kind of goes to say something about how we think about these two entities altogether. But the fact that there was a concept of them being in love and them being completely separated, speaks about the cultural thinking that went behind when they were trying to create the myth and the idea of creation itself. So right off with that, I want to begin with the first story, which comes from the Sumerian the Sumerian mythology itself. Now, before I begin the story, I want to give a little bit of context. I also want to say that when I'm going to be talking about the stories, given the feedback I've been getting a lot of from people, I know the names are something very hard to remember, even as someone who's interested in mythology and hearing a lot of professional mythologists. Names are something very tough to remember. But the beauty of stories is that when the names are actually mentioned, you tend to understand their personality. So which is the reason what I'm going to do is, when I'm going to tell the stories, I'm going to use the character names of the main characters and the tertiary characters, but I'm also going to talk about their monikers. So if there is someone, there's a god, I'm going to mention the god and what is he a god of every time I tell the story. So that will help you remember it. You don't have to focus on the names itself, just remember what is the attribute of that god. Okay. And having said that, if there's any questions, please let me know. I'll definitely answer it in between the story or after the story itself. Right. So just getting on to the story of Ki and An, which is the story from the Sumerian mythology itself. So right before I talk about the story, I want to mention, I hope you can see this, right? This is something that every time I have to just check again, ensuring if everyone is able to see it. Are you able to read this? Yeah. So I'm going to just talk about where does the word Sumerian come from. Sumerian is the word that comes from Sumer, which is actually the southern Mesopotamian region, which is the modern Iraq region. And what you have to understand about the Mesopotamian mythologies itself is it's one of the oldest. In fact, it's actually the oldest by the evidence itself. The date, the range of the Sumerian itself, or at least the Mesopotamian thing itself, ranges from 4500 BCE to 1900 BCE. Just to give you the context, Harappan civilization itself started. The earliest evidence of Harappan civilization we have is around 3300 BCE. The Puranas, the Puranic stories, which obviously came way after the Harappan civilization and after the Vedic civilization, the earliest dating back, they go back to 300 century BC. So imagine 300 century BC. That's when the stories of Vishnu, Shiva, and all start condensing into coherent narratives, right? So what you have to understand is that this is a story long earlier. Also, because it's a very old story, this story comes from the only remaining entities or the elements of the stories we have is from these broken off tablets and all. I had a hard time finding the full story. In fact, the story was briefly mentioned. It's the story of creation itself in the Sumerian mythology, and it was mentioned in a few lines. So the story itself, what I have done is there's a lot of embellishment. There's a lot of creative liberties I've taken to ensure that there's an understanding based on my understanding of the text, and also looking at various retellings that have gone so far online and in the books that I could find. So that's the place where Sumer is, okay? And we're going to be talking about the story of Ki and An. So just to start, at the beginning there was nothing, and then there was Namu, the primordial sea, and stretched and filled the world with her gushing garments. And as she was filling the world, she felt a little alone, for there was no one to share the world with. Compelled by a creative force and motivated by a maternal instinct, she gave birth to the two gods, Ki, the earth goddess, and An, the sky god. Now, both the young deities soon found each other. They found a deep desire for each other. and soon they ended up engulfing each other in an eternal embrace. An, with his celestial cloak, would often cover Ki's bountiful bosoms, while Ki would readily reciprocate An's amorous advances. Love soon turned into lust. Courtship performance soon turned into carnal pursuits. And so intensely involved they were in their intimacy that they didn't even notice that they were giving birth to new beings into the cosmos itself. These were the 7 children who the world will later come to know as the Anunnakis. So the Anunnakis, there were 7 children. Now, what should have been a celebratory revelation turned into a claustrophobic reality for these Anunnakis. For they were trapped between their own parents right from the moment of their creation. Insulted by this inconsideration and compelled by the confinements, one of the Anunnakis, Enlil, the wind god, along with his other 6 brothers, decided something had to be done. I mean, if you think about it, the creation or the cosmos itself is too crucial to be left alone for just the couples. And so, with a hefty heave, Enlil completely cleaved off the 2 realms right from within. And the 2 lovers, Ki and An, were so lost in their lovemaking that they didn't even notice that they were being pulled away from each other. It was only when Ki felt An's clasp completely loosening up that she realized that her lover was being pulled away. In fact, An soon found himself completely torn away from his own consort, floating above her, but completely out of reach. While this was happening, while both the lovers, they started lamenting about this new reality, Enlil approached Namu. So Enlil approached Namu to help him create a new set of beings who could share this newfound space with him. Namu gave him a secret, and Enlil was able to create the humans, who he then placed on Ki itself. Enlil expected his mother Ki, the earth goddess, to nurture this new prized creations that he had. And Ki complied, for without her lover, she had resigned to the role of being a mother, catering unconditionally to her children's demand. Enlil then asked his father, An, the sky god, to provide a space for him and the Anunnakis, the rest of his brothers, to preside and watch over the humans. An, in his sorrow, submitted to his son's request. Humans had begun to flourish, and they started worshipping Enlil. Enlil was gaining strength and started having a stronger hold, a stronger belief system being built around him. And all this, while it was happening, the Enlil and the Anunnakis presided with the An as the Anunnakis, looking at the gods, while Ki was taking care of the human beings. Time went on, and the tales of the Anunnakis eclipsed the tragedy of An and Ki. They're still there if you see them outside. They're passing into oblivions, but they still watch each other and want each other for the rest of the eternity. So yeah, that was the first story. It's a little. What's interesting, one thing about the story is also the An and Ki. They, if you look at from the mythology perspective of the worship, they're not really worshipped a lot. Think of An as almost something like a Brahma, where he's definitely an important figure, but he's someone that is not seen that often in worship and all. Ki, on the other hand, soon disappears from a lot of literature. In fact, one of the Anunnakis named Enki, who's also a water god, he's also a mischievous, trickster god. He soon takes over her place. Remember, Iraq, Mesopotamian was a place where there was a lot of arid land. There wasn't too much water. So they always believed that the Namu and like the water itself is something that is presiding underneath Ki, and that's something they don't have always an access to. Because Enlil, the wind god, was someone they actually worshipped a lot. In fact, Enlil, Enki, the new god, one of the brothers, and An, they are kind of like the primordial, the most important gods in the Mesopotamian. Obviously, because this is a very ancient myth, and over time, when the Babylonians come, when the Akkadians come, the names are changed. So there's a concept called syncretism, which is basically when different belief systems come and they mesh together to form a new person, sort of a thing. Hinduism is known for that. I mean, we have gods which are almost like a mixture of like two gods and all. Hinduism itself has evolved over time. So we're taking new ideas from different gods. We've even taken certain figures and made them, deified them, or taken a figure that was actually worshipped like Indra and reduced him to a small character. So syncretism is very common in Hinduism, except the fact that because Hinduism is a living myth, we tend to not see that as often. But with the ancient myths, this was something that was very, very common. So this was a story of Ki and An. Ki being the earth goddess and An being the sky god. I hope you enjoyed the story. I will talk about the next story, which is from the Egyptian gods, the Egyptian mythology itself. So, right off the bat, the Egyptians also have a lot of gods, and there's sort of a genealogy. So I'll mention it in the story of how this comes to be, and what exactly happens between the gods that leads to separation itself. So no one in the world knows how the world came to be, but it did come in one way or the other. Who can tell how the world came to be except the gods themselves? Some say that the world originally came from the primordial waters of pre-creations, signified by Nun, the water being. And from her came a mound, the mound of the first occasion, which led to a self-created god named Atum. As Atum became more and more aware of himself, thus appeared Ra, the sun. In fact, they became one god for a lot of people. Now, Atum and Ra, they were self-created, and they were self-begotten, that just by touching himself sexually, he was able to create two new beings, using his hand almost as a feminine representation. One he named Shu, the god of wind, and the air began to blow. And the other one he named Tefnut, the goddess of moisture, and the rain began to drop. And soon these two entities found each other, and they began to couple. And as they coupled, they themselves gave birth to two new beings: Geb, the earth god, and Nut, the sky goddess. Now, as young couples, they began to play with each other. Geb and Nut started really liking each other, and they wanted to always find each other and be with each other all the time. Nut, the sky goddess, would often flirt by drawing with the stars, resulting in the constellation for Geb. And Geb, on the other hand, would try to make these glorious floral decorations on his body to amuse Nut. And with every interactions, they became emotionally and physically closer to each other. And they often fondled with each other's artistic outputs, spanning all over the cosmos itself. But this blissfulness that they had between them was soon to be over. This dalliance was doomed from the beginning. For Ra, the god that came out from Atum, had was gaining traction, was someone becoming very popular with the rest of the cosmos, and he was insecure about his place in the universe. He wanted to ensure that his throne is not usurped by any new beings that come out from any of these activities and creations itself. So when he found out that Nut was about to bear child with Geb, he was furious, but he was too late to stop it. For Geb and Nut had already given birth to 4 gods, the gods that will become very important in the Egyptian mythology: Set, Isis, Osiris, and Nephthys. Ra knew that at some point of time, one of these gods is fated to take over his power, and he was so angry that he wanted to punish the couples, Geb and Nut. He demanded his father, Shu, the god of wind, to separate Geb and Nut. Shu interjected himself between Geb and Nut, pushing them away. Each day, Ra would travel through Shu, overseeing the creation that was there, getting worshipped by the people, and ensuring that the lovers are not able to see each other with his complete brightness. But every night, when Ra finally goes into the underworld, Shu feels so remorse for having broken her children, the 2 lovers, that she becomes transparent as wind, as air, so that at least Geb and Nut can see each other, and also their creative gifts of flower and stars that they used to make for each other. So that was the story of Geb and Nut, which was ultimately broken apart by their own father. What's interesting in this story is the fact that in this one, the Egyptians believed that the earth itself was a male god, Geb, and Nut was the night sky goddess in the Egyptian mythology. And it's whenever the sun used to come in, Nut was thrown away. It was only at the night when Ra used to go into the underworld. Nut and Geb would come closer to each other. They would see each other, and because thanks to their father, trying to be transparent, allowing them to at least see each other and their prized creations that we still see as constellations and as the vegetation that we see. It's if in the last session I had talked also about Ra, going to the underworld and all. So he literally goes to the underworld through Geb. In some of the mythologies, it's also said that Geb kind of conspired with the Apep, the serpent, to ensure that Ra is finally destroyed because of what Ra had done, between him and his lover. So there is a lot of backstories, and there are a lot of other side stories that do happen, and that leads to this thing. But it's the interplay between them, the gods. The Egyptians believed that Ra was the reason that these guys were not together at all anymore. So yeah, that was the story of Geb and Nut from the Egyptian mythology. We'll go into the third story. If you have any questions, please feel free to type or ask me right away. I am happy to answer it. The main purpose of these sessions are to to ultimately bring you these stories, but also to ensure there is discussions that that could happen within that. What does it mean to you? How do you feel about certain characters? It's also important to remember that the stories, these stories do seem to have like 2 people who are lovers, and there's there is someone who's like an enemy, who seems like who's doing something wrong to them. But just remember that all of them have their own motives of why they're doing it. So going on to the last story, this story comes from the Polynesian mythology. Polynesia is basically the region where the New Zealand to Hawaii, to the Easter Islands and all that entire islands that you see in the Pacific Ocean. So this story actually comes from the Maori mythology, which is like a special region in the Polynesian thing. But the variations of the stories are popular throughout. As with Hindu mythology, this is something that is, I mean, there are multiple variations of it. There is no one story itself. And this story, the story is about Papa, the earth goddess, and Rangi, the sky god. So think of it as Earth Mother and Sky Father. What's interesting is, I know the word Papa is always used in Indian context as something to mean paternal, but in this one, her full name is Papatunki, which is actually a shortened version. Papa is the word that was used to describe the goddess itself. So just keep that in mind. And so let's begin the story itself. So Rangi, the Sky Father, and Papa, the Earth Mother, were primordial beings who lied locked in love from the start itself. Existence itself was entangled in their embrace for eons. Their sexual union resulted in series of birth. Their children, 70 of them, all males, were gods in their own right. And while they lived securely in their mother's womb, when they were born, they were forced to live in a cramped space between their parents. And soon enough, they became so sick of this that they planned to separate them and allow light into their world. The fiercest amongst them, named Tu, the god of humans, or the god of war itself, decided that the best way to do this is to ultimately kill the parents itself. But his brother, Tane, the forest god, told him a better plan, said that we don't have to kill them, let's just separate them far away. Let's put the father, Rangi, far up in the skies while our mother, Papa, can nurture us. And most of the gods finally agreed with this, and so began the attempt of finally pushing the parents apart. But in spite of the effort, all the gods, when they were trying to push the Rangi, their father, with their hands, putting their feet on the ground, the Papa and Rangi was so tightly, the hug was so hard that no one was able to push them. Thing. It was only when Tane, the forest god, decided to put his back on Papa, the Earth Mother, and firmly put his roots inside the mother, and using his legs, he pushed Rangi, the father, far. Every sinewy muscles was tested out here, and with a lot of cries and surprise, he was able to move the two lovers a bit. But even though he was strong, he was not able to completely separate them off, because the parents did not let go of each other that easily. However, they did manage to put Rangi far away from Papa itself. Rangi was completely exposed. They could see Rangi completely, and so was Papa itself. And this is when Tane, the forest god, felt a little empathic and a little remorse for what he had just done. So he searched the skies, and he took the stars and the sun and the moon and all, and he put them on Rangi itself, so that his father is more appropriately dressed, and the mother could at least see his father having their own dignity maintained. So while most of the gods were happy with the separation, because now there was light and there was finally being able to do what they wanted to do, there were some of the children who were not happy with this. They were very angry. In fact, Tavari, the wind god, was so angry and so hurt by the cries of his parents that he promised his siblings that they will have to deal with his anger. He flew off, to be with Rangi, his father, and every so now often sends storms to break the forest of Tane itself. Which is why winds and storms and all keep breaking the forest a lot. Along with this, he he started a fight with Tangaroa, Tangaroa being the sea god, where a lot of wind and all kept sweeping up the sea. Tangaroa was so frightened that many of the animals that were within the sea ran off to hide inside the forest. And Tangaroa always holds a grudge against the animals who ran away, which is why the sea became something that was the only animals that stayed back were the fish. So Tangaroa ended up making the sea such a way that the only animals that stayed back were able to breathe within it, and the rest of the animals, if they ever come back, they will be drowned by it. But the only one who could challenge Taviri, the wind god who was wreaking havoc among his brothers, was Tu, the god of men and war itself. Using the wood that was provided by his brother Tane, the forest gods, he managed to conquer the wind, creating sails with boats and all that he was able to use. The humans were able to use to navigate, and fishing equipments that he was able to fish for the animals and all. And this fight kept going on. Meanwhile, watching their offsprings completely get into this war zone, Rangi and Papa continued to grieve for each other to this day. Even now, Rangi's tears fall on Papa in the form of rain to show that he still misses and loves her. And sometimes, Papa heaves and strains herself, trying to break herself apart, ensuring that she's able to reach out through the formations of mountains to reach her lover, but to no avail. Sometimes, Papa lets out a helpless sigh in the form of mist to try reaching Rangi itself. And Rangi tries to warm her bodies with his luminous clothing of sun, moon and all. And in doing so, they both continue to nourish the earth. So that was a story that came from the Maori mythology itself. I see a question. Are these stories related to horizon, where sky and earth meet? So the word horizon itself is not something that comes in mythologies. The idea of them meeting up is something that is talked about in the way any of these ones, any of these gods are doing, whether it's through the trees, whether it's sometimes through the rain. What's interesting is in my understanding of it, horizon is probably the reason why humans started believing the idea that at some point these gods must have been connected and now they're apart. So this must have been the inspiration for many of the stories itself. Horizon itself does not feature as an entity within the thing, but I do want to mention that. Like the stories I've mentioned from the Sumerian, the Egyptian, and also the Polynesian mythology, there is a story even in our Vedic mythology about the Dayas Pitra, which is the sky father, and Prithvi Mata, which is the earth mother, who were also broken apart. Sometimes it's attributed to Indra himself. The only thing is the story is not exactly very coherent or enough. That's the reason I didn't use that story to talk about it. But what's interesting is there is a story of Indra who kind of rescues Usha, the goddess of dawn. And finally, when he does that by breaking a cave, she does rise from the horizon. So I do feel there are elements of horizon that is mentioned, but it's not something that has come out very often by the things. But it's an interesting idea to think about where the horizon features in the stories itself. So I hope you like the stories. Let me know if you have any questions so far. I am noticing a lot of people are watching here. Hello anyone who's joined in new. So we just finished the 3 stories that were told about the separation of earth and sky. So I want to bring out a very important theme that has come out from all these stories. So first of all, if you see it from a faraway perspective, you'll see certain characters being very obvious. Earth and sky are there, but there's always wind who finally comes in the middle of pushing them away. And it's a very interesting thing that it's almost like humans had used this idea of the 2 realms being separated by another entity, another god itself. But what I want to point out about these stories itself is the theme about the idea of lost or lingering love itself. So if you see the stories, there are the three stories we talked about. We talked about the Ki and An story, we talked about Geb and Nut, and we talked about Papa and Rangi. The three things that do come out from all these stories is that the love itself, there are three things that are always present. There is the circumstance present in all the situation. There is the craving present, which is the longing, and then there is the casualty that's present, which is the cause and effect, which is the lesson that is always there in the stories. What I find is very interesting is because too often in the language of love, love is always understood through the lens of just locating it. If you think about most of the movies, the idea of finding love itself is where the stories end at, as if the idea of finding it is the finish line. But I think what these stories go to say is that love is never a destination, it's a journey, it's something that keeps happening. And the one component of love is definitely finding each other, but also in trying to be with each other as much as possible. And if you're not with each other, does the love go away altogether? Because yes, love does begin by, it starts when you are trying to seek it, but the best love stories are the ones that end with the sacrifice. Because in all these stories, this idea of sacrifice, the separation itself is a sacrifice that had to be done to sustain the world. All the gods who kind of finally broke the things up, they did it because that was the only way to sustain, especially for us humans to live. So before we demonize the idea of them or this thing, or paint it as just a tragedy that had to happen, we have to see, we have to understand it in the context of why it had to happen, and at the same time, the elements that are there in the story. There is a part of luck being played in. It happened at the time it happened, and it had its own consequences. There's a reason why the world is the way it is. But what sustained the all of them is the longing they have for each other, and ultimately it's the longing that helps in maintaining the world. If you look at today's context, the concept of this COVID situation, lockdown itself seems to be lessening or adding load to love. Especially those of us in long distance relationship, or just even the general love itself, right? It kind of adds that, but it is by social distancing we are able to sustain ourselves in order to survive for tomorrow. So sometimes the idea, the act of being separated is actually what needs to happen for the world to be sustained. So yeah, that was something that I wanted to bring up in this in the stories, and in the theme itself. It's something we need to think about. I definitely, after reading these stories, I was thinking about earth and sky so often that we think of them in a very non-physical, non-conscious way. But I think the stories itself talk about how the interaction, the relationship between the two realms is something that comes out for the desires for each other, and in doing so helps us live in the world. So yeah, that was the stories and the session. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Are there any questions that you have? I will be happy to answer it. If there are questions just in general also, we can talk about that. They don't have to be about these stories itself. So I'll wait for that. While I wait for the questions itself, anyone who has these things, I do have a few announcements. I'm going to be starting a new sub-series on Mythematical. For those of you who are interested to think or know more about mythology itself. Mythology is definitely a lot about stories, but there's if you read enough mythologies, you'll know that there are these structures, there are these frameworks which are kind of working for the stories to emerge. And for those of you who are interested in exploring the concept of mythology itself, how the mythology itself is created, or how the mythology itself is interpreted or even interacted with, and what does it lead to, looking at it from a socio-political angle, looking at it from philosophical angle, and just in general, I'm going to be doing a new session. These are going to be coming in different forms. They may be a little, more deeper and a little more intense. But yeah, I would love for you guys to check it out and let me know your feedbacks and all. I'll definitely be working on them. The titles, the session names are going to be called Mythematical Metamorphoses, because they're basically these mouthful food for thoughts for everyone. They're not going to be too long, they're just going to be short, but they're going to be something that is an idea that I'm working on, and hopefully you guys enjoy that. So I thought it'll be a good time to announce that thing, to watch out for that soon. And I don't think there's any questions right now. Feel free to put the questions whenever you have on the comments itself. I must say there are a lot of things that I found out about these stories that I haven't mentioned them. There are a lot of side plots and reasons for why certain things happened, which goes into another story altogether. But they do end up happening. Okay, I have a question right now. Would like to know about the frameworks to build myths that thing? Yeah, Baru. So I think you would definitely enjoy the metamorphoses. I would love to get your feedback. I'm still working on the format and how I want to be doing that. I am not 100% sure if I want it to be just videos or it definitely won't be a live. Whether they are video recordings or like articles and all, I'll figure that out. But yeah, it'll be something interesting, and it is something that we'll be working towards. I see another feedback, which is Anaga. Yeah, hi Anaga, it's good to see you here. I know we were talking about mythology. I know you love mythology itself. So the question you put is the theme of sky and earth being separated by an external entity seems to be because and to support the three other entities and humanity. Can it be said that the five elements coexist through the distance in a lot of mythology? That's a very interesting point. I do think that the elements itself, the interplay of the elements. I mean, I had spoken about water and I had spoken about fire, and in this session we've spoken about earth and air, or wind, right? And I do feel that the five elements, I mean, generally the classical stories are always about four elements. The fifth element is something that came in very late in the Greek Aristotelian times, and in Hinduism it came in a different situation altogether. But I do feel that the distance itself does have a big impact on the elements itself. I mean, fire and water cannot be together. Maybe that's why the earth and sky cannot be together too. But I would love to find more stories and a more coherent philosophy that is made why it is like that. The stories definitely talk about how it became, but why do we want to believe that, at least mythologically? That's something that will be a very interesting thing to think about and figure out. But yeah, I do feel that's an interesting question and an interesting thought to chase. Yeah, so that was the thing. This was a fun session for me. I really loved exploring the stories and telling you guys the stories. I'm also learning certain things about the storytelling itself that I think will make it much better. And every session, I'm trying to improve it. So please, definitely give me your feedback on how you would like it. Is there something you would have liked to hear more about? I tend to make the sessions more on story summary and then story analysis, but I do understand that it's fun sometimes to perform the stories itself. I would have liked if I was able to share like a picture along with the thing, but Facebook does not really allow that right now. It's an Instagram live thing. So, but when it is introduced, I'll definitely have more visual cues itself. Ro, I see a question from your thing. You said that Hindu mythology is a living mythology and the ancient Sumerian versus the ancient Sumerian mythology. Are the two other stories also belong to ancient myths, or they're present in the living culture traditions of the people? No, they're not. I mean, honestly speaking, there isn't really a worship done for Egyptians, Egyptian stories, and the even in Polynesians. To be really honest, one of the reasons not done is colonization, and there are certain tribes who still follow it. But when I said that Hinduism is a living mythology, what I mean is it's something that's still practiced heavily, rather than something that is just dying off with a few cult practicing. Polynesian mythology and all are almost lost, with a few people remembering them as stories. The worship itself is not as much done. This is what I meant by living mythology. The act of believing the god actually exists, the act of worshipping the god, is what makes Hinduism a unique mythology, despite being one of the oldest mythologies itself. The Greek mythology, the Egyptian mythology, Norse mythologies, they tend to be a little more dead, because the only way people, people tend to look at them is through a very academic, in a more, cognitive lens. Lot of the stories that come from them are inspiring. In fact, many of the times the stories, the way we hear the stories, especially the Egyptian stories and all, are repurposed so that the Christianity, when it finally took over the world, kind of had this thing that, finally these gods led to the, the gods itself. The idea that, one thing I want to point out is the idea that Ra is seen as this one entity. In fact, given the fact that Egyptian mythology was a polytheistic, mythology, but there's often these one or two gods which seem to be overshining the rest. There is a chain of thought. There is this belief that monotheism as a concept also originated itself in Egypt, where one of the pharaohs, Akhenaten, he started associating himself with Ra, and by Ra he started using that and not worshipping the other gods and all. And what ended up happening was these one god started taking more precedence over the other. Now, when the Christian missionaries and all finally came in, when the whole biblical stories happened and Egypt was involved, many of the stories were told in a way like where the Egyptian gods were the false god. The story of Noah itself, where he's challenging the pharaoh and ultimately unleashes the 10th plague of Egypt. Each of the plague is basically a sort of commentary on one of the gods, this thing. So the goddess Nile, the goddess of locust, and all these other gods finally are shown to be a false god. So many of the stories we see, the way we hear the stories, are kind of told in a way that kind of gives away the weight for Christianity or the biblical telling itself. Many stories end with finally everything getting destroyed and only two human beings surviving and all. Is it easier to discuss ancient mythology compared to touch me not living mythology? I definitely think there is definitely an ease in discussing it without the political connotations. So yeah, I think you're right, where you don't get caught up into the political, politicized realities that you have. So example, if I say something about Odin, or I talk about Zeus and I talk about the problematic elements of Zeus, versus I talk about Zeus as a powerful creator, the you tend to hear it more. People tend to be more receptive about it for two reasons. One is that most of us are atheists to 99% of the the gods. Atheists are just atheists to 100% of the gods. But the problem with Indian mythology, if I say the same thing about Ram, there is a cultural connotation and there is a sense of belief system that people are still going with. So people do have a problem. But having said that, there's also an advantage of talking about living mythologies, because living mythologies by themselves seem to be better documented, better told. The number of variations one person has there are more of them, so finding it is a lot easier. To be honest, for me, when I had to search for the Sumerian mythology, there was not too much mentioned. There was just a few lines. In fact, in every story, the simple line was that Enlil was born and he separated the earth and sky. There wasn't any sort of an emotion given to them. Only through retellings, only through reading about Enlil's character in other stories, or reading about An's character or Ki's character, I was able to make a certain thing, which is never going to be a problem with living mythologies. But also, one thing I want to point out is that living mythologies will never want to be called living mythologies. Remember, for Hindus, this is not a mythology; it's a Sanatan Dharma, which whatever that means. Or for biblical stories, that's the gospel truth, while mythology is something that is the rest of them. So I think it's an interesting question, but I feel that there is a pros and cons to both. And hopefully in my further along, I'll definitely be touching on both living and dead mythologies. So yeah, let's see. Maybe we'll see how people react, and that will tell us, how the living mythologies work in current situation. So thank you everyone. I think this was really good. Is there any other questions you have, or anything that you want to point out? I do want to say that some of the gods were very, very interesting. I mean, one thing that I feel is that Enlil is a god who's very temperamental. In fact, the reason there's a flood myth in Sumerian stories and all is because he got very annoyed by humans making too much noise. So he kind of destroys his own creation because they were making too much noise. Shu and Tefnut. I mean, first of all, I love the fact that the Egyptians have a god for moisture. It just tells you something that I mean, you think of Egypt as a place of desert where moisture would be too less. So the fact that they kind of deified the concept of moisture is just very exciting. I mean, I don't think we have that concept in Indian mythology. But yeah, I think the gods themselves are very, very interesting. So yeah, I think that was it. Feel free to add more comments and all. Hopefully this was exciting for you. This was Mythematical, and I was your mathematician and host, Anupriya. I will see you next time with a new topic and the new sub-series that I'm working on. See you.